We all wanted the millions. We just couldn't agree on who deserved them more. My siblings and I turned our mother's death into a business transaction, treating her life's work like a clearance sale. But greed is a poison that doesn't care who it kills. By the time we realized what mother had truly left us, we had already traded a $50 million secret for a few worthless pennies. This isn't just about money. It's about what we lost when we tried to take it all. The funeral service hasn't even concluded before the buzzing starts. Not the buzzing of bees in the farmhouse garden, but the vibration of 3 smartphones in the front row of the pews. Bob doesn't even wait to get to the reception. He's standing by the cemetery gate, mid-conversation with a real estate agent. I don't care about the zoning history, Jerry. I want to know the highest price per acre. It's a prime location for a strip mall or a warehouse. Just get me the numbers. Beside him, Linda is reapplying her lipstick, looking at the farmhouse as if it were a stain on her designer shoes. The moment the check clears, I'm never stepping foot in this dusty town again. Mom spent 40 years rotting away in that house. I'm not spending 40 minutes more than I have to. Tracy is cold, weary, and just as eager to cash out. We need to split the antique furniture separately, she says, checking a spreadsheet on her tablet. The house is just a shell. The land is where the money is. Let's not get sentimental. Sentimentality costs 10% in commission. There is no grieving. There are no shared stories of their mother's kindness. To the 3 of them, their mother was simply the person holding the title to a valuable piece of real estate. They walk through the farmhouse rooms not as children visiting home, but as inspectors looking for flaws that might lower the asking price. Look at this wallpaper, Bob sneers, peeling back a corner with a disgusted flick of his finger. It's pathetic. She lived like a pauper while sitting on 20 acres of gold. Let's get the for sale sign up before the grass even grows over the grave. Unified by a singular, cold ambition, the siblings shake hands on a pact. No emotions, no delays, and whoever brings the highest bidder gets an extra 5%. The family home is no longer a home, it's a target. The dining room of the Gable farmhouse, once a place of Sunday roasts and holiday laughter, had been transformed into a cold, makeshift boardroom. 3 laptops sat on the scarred oak table, their screens glowing with spreadsheets and competing offers. The siblings sat around it, not as family, but as predatory partners in a high-stakes deal. Mr. Morris, the family attorney, sat at the head of the table. He looked tired. He had known their mother for 30 years, and the clinical way her children were dissecting her life's work made his stomach churn. "We have 2 final contenders," Morris said, sliding 2 folders across the table. "I've vetted them both, and while the numbers look similar on the surface, the intentions behind the offers couldn't be more different. I urge you to listen carefully to the terms, not just the bottom line." Bob leaned forward, his sharp features illuminated by the harsh overhead light. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes darting to the folders. "Skip the philosophy, Morris. Who is offering the most cash?" Morris sighed and opened the first folder. "This is an offer from Mr. Elias Thorne. He's a well-known conservator and art collector. He's offering $1.1 million, all cash. His condition is that the house remains standing for at least 6 months so he can conduct a historical survey. He has a strange obsession with this property. He believes the architecture holds a specific value." Linda let out a sharp, mocking laugh, her gold bracelets clinking as she crossed her arms. "A historical survey? That sounds like code for I'm going to find reasons to delay the payment. We don't have 6 months, Morris. I have a lifestyle to maintain, and Bob has investors to pay back." "Mr. Thorne's money is ready to wire today," Morris countered. "But," he hesitated, "there is a second offer. Sterling Development Group. They are offering $1.3 million. Bob's eyes lit up. 200,000 more, that's nearly 70 grand more for each of us. "Wait," Morris interrupted. "Listen to the contingency. Sterling Development doesn't care about the house. They are a salvage and demolition firm. Their plan is to raze the house to the ground within 48 hours of closing to clear the land for a shipping warehouse. They won't even walk through the front door. They'll just bring in the dozers." Tracy, usually the most calculated of the 3, tapped her stylus against her tablet. $1.3 million is the highest bid. Why are we even talking about the collector? Who cares if they knock the house down? It's an eyesore anyway. It's not just about the house, Tracy. Morris said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. Your mother spoke to me many times about the value of the home's interior. She was adamant that the house should be sold to someone who appreciated its structure. Mr. Thorne isn't just a buyer, he's an expert. He sees something in these walls that Sterling doesn't. If he's willing to pay over $1 million just to look at the house, don't you think you should wonder why? Bob stood up, pacing the small room. I know why. He's a weirdo with a hobby. But Sterling is a business. Business is fast. Business is certain. If we go with Thorne, we're stuck waiting for him to play with his magnifying glass. If we go with Sterling, we have the money in our accounts by Friday. Bob is right, Linda added, checking her reflection in her phone screen. $200,000 is a lot of money to throw away just to satisfy Mom's sentimental ghost. She's gone. She doesn't need a house anymore. We need the cash. You're making a mistake, Morris warned. There is a reason Thorne is bidding so high for a house he doesn't want to live in. There is a reason your mother's will had a specific clause about hidden treasures of the mind and soul. I believe there is something in this house that exceeds the value of the land. The three siblings shared a look. It wasn't a look of curiosity or wonder. It was a look of shared greed. They didn't care about a hidden treasure of the soul. They cared about the $200,000 difference between the two offers. To them, the extra money was a new car, a down payment on a penthouse, a way to erase their mounting debts. We're going with Sterling, Tracy said, her voice final. Tell the collector thanks for his interest, but his historical survey isn't worth $200K to us. Are you sure? Morris asked, one last time. Once you sign with Sterling, they have the right to salvage and destroy. Anything found inside during demolition becomes theirs. You lose all claim to the contents the moment that contract is signed. We've already searched the place, Bob lied, remembering the half-hearted walk through they'd done the day before. There's nothing in here but dust and old memories. Sterling can have the scrap wood. We'll take the $1.3 million. Morris shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He pulled the Sterling contract from his bag. The paper felt heavy, like a death warrant for the family legacy. One by one, the siblings signed. Bob's signature was bold and aggressive. Linda's was loopy and arrogant. Tracy's was cold and precise. As the ink dried, a loud roar rumbled from the end of the driveway. The siblings looked out the window. A massive flatbed truck was pulling up, carrying a yellow excavator. It wasn't waiting for the weekend. Sterling Development was already here. They moved fast, Bob grinned, watching the machine rumble off the truck. I like that. They have to, Morris said quietly, packing his briefcase. They know that once the house is gone, whatever secrets it held are gone too. Or rather, they belong to the person who holds the deed. The siblings laughed, already planning how to spend their new wealth. They didn't notice the black car parked a few hundred yards down the road, the art collector, Mr. Thorne, watching the excavator with a look of mourning. He knew what was inside. He had spent years trying to convince their mother to sell to a museum. And now, he watched as the three people who should have protected her legacy handed it over to a man with a wrecking ball, all for a measly $200,000 extra. Let's go grab a drink, Linda suggested, grabbing her designer bag. To being rich. To the farm, Bob toasted, not even looking back at the house as they walked toward their cars. Behind them, the excavator's claw let out a hydraulic hiss, rising up like a metal beast, ready to tear into the heart of a secret that was worth 50 times what they had just sold it for. The air inside the Gable farmhouse had grown thick, not just with the dust of decades, but with the frantic, feverish energy of three people who had suddenly realized they might have been outsmarted. The closing was set for noon. At 12:01 p.m., the Sterling Development crew would take the keys, and the heavy machinery idling in the driveway would begin its work. But a comment from Mr. Morris as he left, a passing rebob about their mother's undisclosed assets, had planted a seed of paranoia in the siblings' minds. If an art collector was willing to pay $1 million just to look at the walls, there had to be something more than just wood and plaster. We have 3 hours, Bob said, his voice tight. He had stripped off his blazer, his white dress shirt already stained with sweat at the armpits. If there's jewelry, cash, or some hidden safe, we find it now. Once that contract is active, anything we find legally belongs to the developer. Move. They didn't search with the care of children looking for a keepsake. They searched like vandals. Linda was in the master bedroom, her manicured nails clawing at the back of the heavy oak wardrobe. When it wouldn't budge, she grabbed a heavy brass lamp and smashed it against the wood, splintering the antique frame to see if anything was taped behind it. She had to have hidden it somewhere. Linda shrieked, her voice high and ragged. All those years she lived like a monk, wearing the same 3 coats and driving that beat-up truck. She was hoarding it. I know she was. She began ripping the velvet lining out of her mother's jewelry boxes, tossing the modest pearl necklaces and silver lockets onto the floor. To Linda, these weren't memories. They were obstacles. She stomped on a hand-carved music box, crushing the delicate internal gears because she thought the bass felt too heavy. It yielded nothing but broken springs and a haunting, distorted chime that died mid-note. In the hallway, Bob was using a sledgehammer he'd pulled from the barn. Thud. Crack. He swung the heavy iron head into the floorboards near the fireplace. He was convinced their mother had followed the old-school tradition of burying the gold beneath the hearth. "Help me move this." He grunted at Tracy. Tracy, however, was in the study. She wasn't using a hammer. She was using her cold, calculating intellect to scan the shelves. She began pulling books down by the handful, shaking them to see if any cash fell from the pages. Hundreds of volumes, poetry, history, and philosophy, lay in heaps around her feet like fallen soldiers. She came across a small weathered leather journal. It was tucked behind a row of encyclopedias. On the cover, in her mother's elegant script, were the words, "The things I could not say." Tracy flipped it open. Her eyes skimmed the entries. June 14th. The light in the parlor today is exactly as the masters described it. I feel as though I am living inside a masterpiece. I hope my children one day see the beauty I have curated here. It is my greatest gift to them. Tracy. Anything? Bob shouted from the other room, followed by the sound of more wood splintering. Tracy looked at the journal. Her mother was talking about light and beauty. Nothing. Tracy yelled back, frustrated. Just more of her rambling poetry and nonsense about artistic light. It's a waste of time. She threw the journal toward the fireplace. It landed in a pile of discarded newspapers, its pages fluttering open to a detailed diagram of the home's original stone chimney. But Tracy was already turning away, her eyes fixed on a loose floorboard in the corner. She didn't realize that the light her mother wrote about wasn't metaphorical. She didn't realize that the curation mentioned wasn't about the garden. By 11:30 a.m., the house was a disaster zone. The siblings had turned their childhood home into a carcass. The sofa had been slashed open with a kitchen knife to check the cushions. The portraits had been ripped from their frames. The floorboards were a jagged mess of splinters. "There's nothing here," Bob roared, throwing the sledgehammer against the wall in a fit of rage. "We've checked every inch. Maybe Morris was just trying to mess with us. Maybe the art collector was just a crackpot." Linda sat on the edge of the stripped bed, breathing hard, her hair disheveled. "We're getting $1.3 million. That's enough. We don't need to find a secret stash. We won." But they didn't feel like winners. They felt hollow. The house, once warm and filled with the scent of dried herbs and old books, now smelled of dust and destruction. They had destroyed the very sanctuary that had raised them, and for what? A few $100,000 that was already earbobed for debts and shallow luxuries. "Let's just go," Tracy said, wiping a streak of grime from her forehead. "The Sterling crew is pulling up to the porch. If they see the house like this, they might try to sue us for property damage before the closing." They gathered their designer bags and headed for the front door, stepping over the piles of their mother's worthless things. Tracy kicked aside a stack of old letters, oblivious to the fact that one of them contained a receipt from a high-end European art restorer from 30 years ago. As they walked out onto the porch, the foreman of the Sterling crew, a man with a thick neck and a cold, professional smile, tipped his hard hat to them. "Ready to hand over the keys?" "It's all yours," Bob said, leaning against his luxury car. "Just make sure you level it fast. I don't want to see this place the next time I drive through town." "Oh, we'll take care of it," the foreman said, looking past them into the house. He caught the eye of one of his workers, a man who wasn't carrying a sledgehammer but a set of specialized brushes and a thermal scanner. "We're going to take very good care of it." The siblings drove away in a convoy of high-end vehicles, their tires kicking up gravel that pelted the side of the farmhouse. They were looking forward, toward the city, toward the shops. toward the lives they thought they were finally starting. They didn't see the Sterling crew immediately move to the fireplace Tracy and Bob had just abandoned. They didn't see the foreman pull out a blueprint, the same one featured in the journal Tracy had thrown in the trash. "Is it here?" the worker asked. The foreman ran his hand over the stones of the chimney, pressing a specific, unblemished rock near the mantel. The collector was right. These fools didn't even look at the stonework. They were looking for pennies under the floor while the $50 million secret was staring them in the face. Back in the trash pile, the mother's journal lay open to its final page. The last entry read, "To my children, if you are reading this, you have found the beauty I spent my life protecting. If you are not reading this, then you have already sold the only thing that truly mattered." The siblings didn't go far. They parked at a diner 2 miles down the road, sitting in a vinyl booth and refreshing their banking apps like addicts waiting for a fix. They were celebrating their victory, toasting with cheap coffee to the $1.3 million that would soon hit their accounts. "To being the smartest people in the room," Bob said, clinking his mug against Linda's. But back at the farmhouse, the demolition was not going according to plan. There were no wrecking balls. There were no bulldozers crashing through the porch. Instead, the Sterling development crew moved with the surgical precision of a museum heist team. Inside the living room, the foreman, Gus, stood before the massive, ornamental fieldstone fireplace. He wasn't holding a sledgehammer. He was holding a specialized sonic scanner. He ran it over the stones, listening to the digital pings until the frequency shifted from a solid thud to a hollow ring. "Here," Gus whispered. He pressed a specific jagged stone near the mantelpiece and shoved it inward. With a sound of heavy stone grinding on oiled steel, the entire back wall of the fireplace didn't crumble, it pivoted. It was a masterpiece of 19th century engineering, a hidden door disguised by 2 tons of rock. As the secret partition swung open, it revealed a climate-controlled vault, its walls lined with specialized felt and UV-filtered lighting that flickered to life. Gus stepped inside, his breath hitching. Lord have mercy. The collector was right. Hanging on custom racks were paintings that hadn't seen the light of day in half a century. There was a lost landscape by a Dutch master, a vibrant portrait from the French Impressionist era, and a series of sketches signed by a name that every school child knew. This wasn't a shack. It was a private gallery worth a king's ransom. The siblings' mother hadn't been a hoarder of junk. She had been the secret guardian of a lost collection, hidden away from the world to protect it from the very greed that was currently sitting in a diner 2 miles away. Just then, Bob's phone chimed. It wasn't a bank notification. It was a news alert from the local Gazette, which had a reporter on site for the demolition. "Check this out," Bob laughed, turning the screen. "They're already posting photos of the dump being torn down." But as he zoomed in on the photo, his smile died. The image showed the Sterling crew carefully carrying a gold-framed canvas out of the house, wrapped in protective bubble wrap. In the background, the demolition foreman was shaking hands with the eccentric art collector Mr. Thorne. "Wait. That's not a wrecking ball," Linda whispered, leaning in. "Why are they carrying out a painting?" "We searched that room. There was nothing but wallpaper." "Look at the caption," Tracy said, her voice turning cold as lead. The headline read, "Lost Masterpieces Revealed. Sterling Salvage Uncovers $50 million Secret Collection Behind False Fireplace at Gable Farm." The diner fell silent. The siblings stared at the screen as the realization washed over them like a tidal wave. The $1.3 million they had fought over, the extra $200,000 they had traded their mother's wishes for. It was nothing. It was a tip, a rounding error. 50 million? Bob's voice was a strangled croak. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had held a sledgehammer just an hour ago. He had been inches away from it. He had pounded on that very fireplace. He had called his mother a pauper while she sat on a fortune that could have bought 10 of the warehouses they were so eager to build. "We have to go back," Tracy said, her face pale. "The contract. We have to break the contract." They scrambled out of the booth, knocking over their coffee, and raced toward their cars. They drove like maniacs, back toward the house they had just abandoned, their hearts hammering against their ribs. But as they rounded the final bend, they saw the gates were already locked. A private security team stood at the entrance and the black car of the art collector was pulling out, a triumphant smile visible behind the tinted glass. They hadn't just sold a house. They had sold the greatest secret in the history of the state for the price of the dirt it sat on. The gravel crunched violently under their tires as Bob, Linda, and Tracy slammed on their brakes at the edge of the property. They didn't even turn off their engines before lunging out of their cars, sprinting toward the front porch where the Sterling development foreman, Gus, stood calmly checking off items on a digital tablet. "Stop! Stop everything!" Bob screamed, his face flushed a deep, panicked red. "The deal is off. We're nullifying the contract." Gus didn't even look up. "The deal isn't off, Mr. Gable. The deal is closed. The wire transfer was initiated 10 minutes ago. You're officially guests on Sterling property. That art." Linda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the climate-controlled van parked near the barn. "Those paintings belonged to our mother. They weren't part of the sale. You're stealing our family heritage." Tracy pushed past her siblings, trying to maintain a shred of her cold, analytical composure, though her hands were shaking. "Listen to me. We sold you a house and 20 acres of land for a development project. We did not sell you a hidden museum. That collection is personal property. It's a separate asset. If you don't hand it over, we'll tie you up in litigation for the next 20 years. At that moment, Mr. Morris, the family lawyer, stepped out from behind the van. He looked at the three of them with a mixture of pity and a hard, cold sense of justice. "I wouldn't advise that, Tracy," Morris said, tapping a thick stack of papers in his hand. "Morris, thank God." Bob rushed to him. Tell them they can't take the art. We're your clients, do your job." "Actually," Morris said, his voice as sharp as a razor, "you were my clients until you signed this. I warned you, Bob. I warned you all that Sterling was a salvage firm. I warned you that the collector, Mr. Thorne, wanted the house for a reason. But you were too busy counting your $1.3 million to listen." He opened the contract to a highlighted section. "Read Section 9, Clause C. It's standard for AS's liquidation sales. The buyer acquires the real property and all contents, fixtures, and hidden structures therein, known or unknown, at the time of transfer." "Hidden structures?" Tracy whispered, her heart dropping into her stomach. "The vault." Morris nodded toward the fireplace. "By law, it is a structural fixture of the chimney. And the contents of that fixture were sold the moment you chose the higher bidder. You wanted the maximum cash, remember? You wanted the fast deal. Well, you got it. But it's $50 million. Linda wailed, collapsing onto the porch steps. "You can't let them take $50 million for a $1 million payment. It's unconscionable." "Unconscionable?" Morris stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "What's unconscionable is the way you three treated this home. You spent the last 3 hours tearing this place apart like vultures. You smashed your mother's furniture, ripped up her floors, and threw her personal journals into the mud. You didn't care about the heritage until you saw the price tag on the frame." The developer, a man in a sharp charcoal suit who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward. "We've already pre-sold the Dutch landscape to Mr. Thorne's foundation. The commission alone is more than we paid for this entire farm. If you try to block the gate, I'll have you arrested for trespassing on my land." Bob looked at the excavator. He looked at the vault. He looked at the $1.3 million notification on his phone, the money that had felt like a fortune an hour ago, but now felt like a handful of pocket change. "We lost," Tracy said, her voice hollow. "We traded the greatest treasure in the world for a warehouse lot." The foreman signaled to the excavator driver. The massive metal claw began to rise, not toward the vault but toward the rest of the house. The demolition was beginning, and the siblings were forced to stand behind a yellow tape line, watching as the walls that had protected them as children were shredded into splinters, knowing that the real heart of the home had already been carried away by people who actually knew its worth. The sun began to set over the jagged remains of the Gable farm, casting long skeletal shadows across the torn earth. The heavy machinery had finally gone silent. The armored trucks and the art collector's sleek vehicles were long gone, carrying away a fortune that would have changed the Gable bloodline for generations. Bob, Linda, and Tracy stood by the roadside, their silhouettes framed by the dust still hanging in the air. They weren't fighting anymore. The fire of greed had burned itself out, leaving only the cold ash of regret. "I checked the bank," Bob said, his voice flat and lifeless. "After the back taxes on the estate, the realtor's commission for the fast sale, and the debt collectors who saw the public record of the sale. I have $12,000 left. Linda let out a hollow, bitter laugh, staring at her dirt-stained designer shoes. 12,000. I spent more than that on the deposit for the condo I can't afford now. We sold Mom's soul for a down payment on a life we'll never have. Tracy didn't speak. She walked toward a pile of debris near the edge of the property. The trash they had hauled out that morning. There, half buried under a broken chair leg, was the leather journal she had tossed aside. It was damp from the evening dew, its pages curled. She picked it up and read the final entry aloud, her voice trembling in the quiet twilight. My dear children, money is a loud thing, but legacy is quiet. I hid the beauty of the world in the walls of our home so you would never have to worry about the cold. But I locked it behind a door that only love and patience can open. If you are reading this together in the parlor, then you are truly rich. If the house is gone, then I fear you have searched with your eyes but not your hearts. The words cut deeper than any legal contract. They realized then that their mother hadn't been testing their business savvy, she had been testing their humanity. The art wasn't hidden to keep it from them. It was hidden to keep it for them, waiting for a day when they would sit together as a family and truly look at the walls that sheltered them. A sleek, white supercar roared past them on the highway. The developer at the wheel, heading toward a celebratory gala. He didn't even glance at the three figures standing in the dirt. To him, they were just another successful acquisition. Fools who didn't know what they had until he took it. The siblings looked at each other. The bond they had shared in their greed was gone, replaced by a mutual resentment that would likely keep them silent for years to venture. They had started the day as partners in a multi-million-dollar deal. They ended it as strangers with empty pockets and heavier hearts. As they walked to their separate cars, the single journal page Tracy held caught the wind and tore away, fluttering over the ruins of the fireplace before disappearing into the dark. The moral: when you value the price of everything, you eventually discover the value of nothing. Greed doesn't just take your fortune, it takes your future. The mother's journal said it best. If the house is gone, you searched with your eyes but not your hearts. Do you think the siblings deserved to lose the $50 million art collection? Or was the punishment too harsh? I'm reading every single comment, so let's talk about it.